Sargis Sangari. I'm going to let Al take it. Al?
Hey, well, thanks, Mike. It's nice to be on again here from Seattle. But the reason you don't have my picture is I've got a face that's built for radio, so it's probably best if your audience doesn't see my face right now. So, but we're thankful that we got this time slot again, and also we're able to get Sargis Sangari back. So, Colonel Sangari, thanks again for coming back on. We had some technical difficulties last week. I blame jamming. And then hopefully this week, we can keep the line up and solid this time, so we can hear all that good important stuff you have to say. So thank you very much for coming back this week.
Let's give it a couple of minutes, by the way, Sargis, for some folks to get on. We should chit chat for a couple of minutes, and actually probably reintroduce Sargis. There's this delay. I see people coming on now, and we'll see what people say about our audio. Where are you at, Sargis, and how's the weather there?
Skokie, Illinois, so I'm part of the larger Chicago area, Cook County, and the weather's still somewhat been cold and warm, so we're hoping that it becomes a little bit warmer. Unfortunately, we're still under the lockdown, so we're going to be extended right now all the way through the end of next month. We'll see if the governor makes a different decision here in Illinois.
Al, what about you up in Seattle?
Actually, we've been having some very good spring weather. We don't want to broadcast that out too much because then people start moving into Washington State. But the weather in Western Washington, just near Seattle, Fort Lewis, is actually very nice. So we've been enjoying the spring, getting out in the sunshine, trying to get vitamin D so we can get that immune system up as peak performance as we can possibly get right now.
Great. I think we've got a few folks on now. Hello, everybody. I see a lot of people saying the audio is good and the video is good. That's good. That's very good to hear. And so, Al, why don't you take it away here, and I'll just be lurking and occasionally interjecting. There's a lot of Sargis has a lot of interesting things to talk about on the Assyrian issues and Turkey issues, and just anyway, listen to him. You'll see what I mean. Al?
Okay, and then we'll do a quick review for the folks that weren't here last week for the introduction. So just a quick background for Sargis Sangari. He's actually got quite the Exodus story himself. So he was born in Iran, and then just after the revolution, came to America, ended up, planting his flag in Chicago, and then joined the U.S. Army, and that's where we crossed paths the first time when he was in the Army, and I was in the Army at the time, and helped him out with some shaping operations over in the Middle East, and then. After the war, he continued to serve. He set up the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, and then continued to serve, on the side that way. And then recently, he threw his hat in the ring. I believe it's the 9th Congressional District in Chicago. Is now running for the U.S. Senate. So a very tough district, but he's determined to go forward with it. So having said that, in the time that I've known him here, about almost 10 years now, has been he's been focused on the threats to the United States. And one of the key things that I noticed particularly about him was he did not ignore China. So 10 years ago, you could barely get a few people besides Bill Gertz, Gordon Chang, and yourself that even paid attention to China. Everybody was kind of tunnel vision on this thing. But there were a few that could see the larger picture, and Sargis Sangari was one of those. And so that's why we kept in touch over the years. And he helped us out, as you remember, Mike, in Tokyo at the conference that we had there. So he spoke about, personnel from that region that went over to the Middle East would become radicalized and then bring that radicalization back home. And so it was an eye-opener for many folks there in Tokyo about what was actually going on and how they were involved in it. So good things, but I won't steal any more of his thunder. I'd like to introduce Sargis here and say, first off, thanks for coming on. And then if you could give us a little more of your story, and for a lot of people that don't know what the Assyrian Christians are, the community you come from, if you could explain a little bit of that as well.
Thank you very much, Al. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, especially Mike for having me on again. You guys are a little bit more powerful than I thought. Last time I was on, as soon as I was done with my interview, my entire site went down. So the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, if anybody's trying to look at it, the WordPress has been compromised. Their servers in both Taiwan and also Singapore have been taking a hit. Since we talked, so we've shifted everything right now. If you want to look me up, instead of going to the NEC-SC.com, you have to go to necse.net because that's our backup. you won't see what we have for this year. You're going to go all the way back to our archives to December of last year. But that's what happens when you hang around Mike and Al. The Chinese take a special interest in you. With that said, though, look, we knew that China was going to be an issue, and I'm glad we had an opportunity that all three of us working hard on this piece, looking at as to what the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was going to do within the region, and what was happening with the relations being built in the Middle East.
Wait, you just blasted right. I'm sorry to interrupt, Sargis, but you just blasted right by the Shanghai Organization. That's very important to lay that out exactly what that is.
Yeah, look, let's start it this way. I mean, remember when we were talking about Tokyo, we came back and I wrote an article, The New Power Relations and the Middle Eastern Crisis. And we had looked at that in October of 2015. That was 8 months after we were on stage together in February of 2015 in Tokyo. And I had made a presentation in Tokyo, Japan, as Al alluded to it, that looked at how China's influence in the SCO was not being checked by the U.S. So for those who don't know what the SCO is, it is a intergovernmental organization that was founded in Shanghai, China. It was established on June 2001. And the SCO itself currently comprises of 8 member states. They are led by China. You have India as being one of them. All the Russia is part of it. Pakistan is one of it. The Southern Caucasus locations are part of it. Uzbekistan is one of them. And then they also have 4 observer states that are interested currently as to ascending to what they call full membership. Afghanistan being one, Belarus, Iran, and Mongolia. So China's looking at that Silk Road.
Which Mongolia?
Well, depending on which Mongolia they decide, you're right. But they're looking at that. Silk Road really to develop their economic route. And there's also dialogue that is taking place with 6 what they call partner nations. Armenia is one, Azerbaijan, Cambodia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Turkey. So this
Here
is what
in that
the SCO
Thailand,
is.
Cambodia.
So this is what SCO is, right? China, you go back 40 years ago, they were starving to death. They had to eat whatever they could get their hands on. And they realized, they said, look, you know what we want to do? We want to expand. How are we going to expand? Let's go back to the old Silk Road and try to expand our power base. So most of these countries, as you see, fall in their backyard and fall along that Silk Road again. So when we came back at the time, under the Obama administration, we wrote the article that was really focused on what the SCO was doing. And at that time, I explained last time we were talking that President Obama was well on his way of trying to leave the Middle East. And he was looking at pivoting towards South America. I was there in a diplomatic capacity in Kuwait. That's where me and Al initially met, and I saw the final troops being pulled out of Iraq.
You mean pivot to Asia? Pivot to Asia, not South America.
Well, Obama was looking at South America, Mike. The current president was looking to pivot to Asia. But Obama had made a decision that we were going to work with the Chinese model, because here's the deal: the Chinese and the SCO did not want to see U.S. really delve into Asia because they were looking at expanding within that region. So when we came back, we looked at what are the interest points. Why isn't Obama using his base with India and his base with other nations to try to check China's expansion? And part of that was because he was literally following the same model that was briefed by China as to what the vision of the Chinese was. Remember that Wang Yi, who in 2012 stood on stage and at Brookings Institute, he made a statement that China has a certain vision for the region and proposed a vision as to how the United States and China can work together. At that time, when he was talking about this particular vision, he said that U.S. and China are diverging in their focus as to what they want to see for their position within the global stage. And he stated that if we work together within this new model that China had proposed, this new concept, that what we would do is we would be able to get to a point where the two nations could avoid any type of friction point, and that would spark a possible conflict between them. So in this concept of saying that we're two powers or dominant global powers are expanding for our own and self-interest, in his concept, which he titled the New Power Relations, he stated that it was necessary for this China's vision to be accepted in order for us to be able to have peace between the two nations, in order to prevent the wars that, as he referenced, that killed millions in the previous century. Now, of course, you figure that the Obama administration would come back and maybe offer a new vision or counter to what Wang Yi had proposed at the Brookings Institute, but they didn't. We started conceding a lot of the regions to the Chinese. Remember, we were saying when we were having discussions between all three of us that we don't understand why even the ambassadors at the time were causing friction points with some of our key allies within the region. A lot of the regions that we conceded to the Chinese or will concede in the future to the Chinese were effectively in a position where the Chinese were using the barrel of the gun to enforce Beijing's rule over those particular territories. So where we are right now is part of it is because of the decisions I've made under previous administration. Given the controlling concept of how communists are and their nature, the Chinese regime is altogether a dictatorial regime that wants to expand its philosophy and export it to other nations. This is what led to where we are today, which is a lot of the nations that they're working with are not happy with them.
Speaking of that, expanding, you see Daniel Miller has a question. Are Mike, Al, or Sargis looking at China's tentacles in Mongolia, outer or inner Mongolia? See, that goes back to what Sargis is saying. Outer Mongolia to Mongolians is inner Mongolia to China, right? So it's reversed, if you know what I'm saying. So they're trying to obviously take Mongolia and everything that they can get their hands on. So when you say outer or inner Mongolia, you actually have to specify from whose viewpoint are you looking at this, Mongolia or Beijing, right? So, yeah, I'm sorry, Al. I mean, Sargis.
Yeah. No, and look, and this is where, I had written a series of articles in the Daily Herald going back to last year and looking at the backyard wars. And I think that under the current administration, we did try to see what we could do within Mongolia, because Mongolia is of an interest to us. Look, if you want to have effects on China, you have to be able to affect China with what it believes is backyard, which is Mongolia, is Korea, it's Japan, these areas which give us an opportunity to kind of put pressure on China, like China is putting pressure on us. It's sad that we got here, but we got here again based on the decisions that were made previously. U.S. Just in the recent administration, going back to previous administration, really bought into this concept. They bought into and actively embraced China's vision for what they were trying to do, this new power relations concept that was introduced by them. And actually, even under Susan Rice, when she gave her speech at Georgetown University after the Wang Yi's speech, she neither articulated a new counter vision to what he had proposed, nor spoke of America's interest specifically in promoting what we call the liberal, democratic, humanitarian right values that we don't hear anymore a lot of times out of the various different administrations. But really discussed into how maybe the U.S. could actually actualize the new power relations with China. So you saw in a few years, whether we liked it or not, under the previous administration, U.S. surrendered a lot of the territory and initiatives to China when it came to foreign policy and the CO axis. And China right now is headed to where it's possibly capable of putting the pressures on the U.S. that we didn't want to see. Look, in 3 weeks, China was able to really scuttle our economy. China, while we were struggling to see how to get basic medical needs and supplies to our states with the coronavirus spreading everywhere, China was already in the underbelly of NATO, providing support requirements. China is the reason why we can't strike a deal or keep pressure on Iran. Why? Because China is a backbone for Iran. What China does, it looks at Iran as its backyard. China is getting now on the oil markets free oil from the Middle East region, as that's probably going to continue for the next 5 years. I don't see how the oil prices are going to be able to recover. And all these countries in the Middle East that we want to have influence on, that we know where China needs its fuel and oil and food, China is getting free oil from them. What does it do? It turns around, like in the case of Iran, says, I'm going to represent you on the global stage. I'm going to defend you because I sit on the Security Council in the UN, and you continue as is. China's the reason why Iran's able to, have the ballistic capability that it has currently, and is going to be probably the reason whether or not Iran is going to have enough money to be able to get its hands on a nuclear weapon. So China's looking at a vision of trying to use the old Silk Road to be able to expand into Europe, and has already been in the underbelly of NATO and working with our NATO allies, whether it be Turkey or whether it be, in this case, Italy, trying to support them with the medical supplies and the manufacturing base that we don't have. I've been told by multiple people that China is not as much of a threat as we believe they are. No, they are, because remember, we're in a fight, as others have said, and it's not Colonel Sangari saying this, the nations we fought against, whether it be Nazi Germany in World War II or Japan or Russia in the Cold War, didn't control our manufacturing base. China controls our manufacturing base. China has enough money through the SCO. It's the 17th. It has 70% of the global GDP that it controls. As of today, right now, if you want me to give a assessment as to where we are, China's on top of that hill, Mike, that we always try to secure. It hasn't secured it yet, but they're sitting on top of it. And the U.S. now has to fight up to be able to knock them off that hill. And you cannot blame them. They went from, like I said earlier, basically trying to eat whatever they could get their hands on. They weren't just satisfied being the 10th largest economy in the world, or the 6th, or the 3rd. They bypassed Japan as a 2nd, and now they are bypassing the U.S. as the 1st largest economy with controlling our manufacturing base. And I know that's a kind of a long-winded answer, but I hope that kind of gives you a holistic concept of where we are today with China.
Al? We seem to have lost Al. All right, let's talk about Assyrian issues. We lost Al.
Let's
talk about Assyrian issues, which I know are dear to your heart.
Look, Assyrians went through a genocide in 2014, and they're dear to my heart because, look, both you and me have been in combat. We fought on the battlefields of Iraq. We've lost friends there. And the Assyrian Christians were, when we invaded Iraq, at 1.5 million. Under our watch, Mike, whether we like to admit it or not, and history will attest to it, it was under our watch that the Assyrians were attacked before the genocide of 2014, nonstop. Churches bombed, everything was destroyed. There was no protection for them. We had all our military force structures, capabilities on the ground from the U.S. side of the house. Our special forces, EU was there, NATO was there, Japan was there, Korea was there, Australia was there, and in this entire process, Georgia was there. What ended up happening is Assyrians basically went from 1.5 million to almost 150,000 remaining. In 2014, I retired. I established the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, which is our think tank and policy and operational arm to try to support what we were trying to do in order to keep the root of Christianity, in this case, the Assyrian Christians, alive in the region. We fought both in Iraq and Syria. And one day the story will come out, and you and me have talked about it, and what their capability was, and what they had done. Look, the Middle East, where Assyrians sit, is in turmoil. It always will be in turmoil. It will be because we always sink money into groups that are not like-minded like us. As an example, look, the Chinese are attracted to the Iranians and the Iranians to the Chinese for a simple reason, because China has this vision of its communist philosophy that it wants to export to all the nations. Iran has a Islamic philosophy that it wants to export to all the nations. These two countries are able to get together and work together because of that. We never go down a range and say, hey, we're going to find like-minded people like us, Assyrians and Judeo-Christians. It was an Assyrian church that actually expanded Christianity throughout the Middle East and Asia. Assyrians expanded it from Iraq, today's Iraq, of course, all the way through to all the nations in Asia. They expanded it to Tibet, to Mongolia, to Japan, to Korea, and even areas in Southeast Asia. There are churches that you will find in Saudi Arabia and all over the Islamic regions are actually built by Assyrian missionaries. Jesus Christ spoke Assyrian. We say that Jesus Christ spoke Aramaic. No, he spoke Assyrian. Aramaic, basically, in Aramaic means Araramta. That means the high ground. And the people who didn't know how to describe the Assyrians, because at that time the Assyrians sat in the Hikari mountain ranges, which are around the southern Turkey, northern Iraq area, for kind of a simple reference, those were the Assyrians. So people who tried to refer to them said Araramta. That means these are the people that live in the high ground. But Jesus spoke Assyrian. Assyrians as a nation accepted Christianity. And ever since, they've been dealing with all the tribulations of being singled out for their Judeo-Christian beliefs. So as China and others look for individuals to link in with that are like-minded, I never understood why we never decided to support these individuals who are like-minded from our philosophies of the Judeo-Christian beliefs and support them. Under the Iraqi constitution, the Assyrians do have a right to have a region, just like the Sunni Muslim Kurds have. And the reason I always reference it that way is because they're Sunni Muslims, majority. They do have Shiites in there. In 2014, when the Assyrians were going through a genocide, the Kurdish youth in Erbil were tearing down a Christmas tree because they didn't want to see the representative of Christianity there. So in the long run, the Assyrians under the Iraqi constitution, which is an Islamic constitution, which we created for Iraq and supported, have still an opportunity to be able to have their own place. And I think if you can have them have their own place, the minority question is now resolved. Because under the Iraqi constitution, it stands being an Islamic constitution, you'll never be able to solve the minority issue. And I've said this to the State Department, because every time a politician in the Parliament of Iraq makes a decision, he has to go to a Sunni or a Shia clergy leader and say that this is what I'm going to do for the Christians. And under the dictates of the Islamic dictates, you're not supposed to do anything for the Christian Assyrians. It doesn't exist. So the only one who could unsolve it is the U.S. side. And if you can allow to take that minority issue off the table for Iraq, then I think you're going to see a much better quality of discussions between the Muslim Kurds and the Iraqi Arab, whether it be Shia or Sunni, to be able to get to an understanding of how to share the resources. These nations in the Middle East right now, the only resource they have is oil. And China is taking it for free. They have nothing else that they could back up to allow them to live in freedom once China goes into their region. And I told the National Security Council 3 years ago when I met with them, I said, hey, what are you going to do when China uses its 43 million Christians, whether it suppresses them or not, to try to make friends with the Christians of the Middle East, especially the Assyrians? There's no answer. They never thought about these things. The things we don't think about, others think about. There's a reason why we're right now stuck in a position where we're violating our own constitution to try to force people to stay at home, not knowing how we're going to be able to get the manufacturing base away from China. as quickly as possible, while China and the SCO are expanding within the region, and will continue to do so. I hate to say, in the detriment to the U.S.
Speaking of quarantine, how's it going in Chicago?
It's going. The quarantine itself. I got to tell you, Mike. I mean, some of the stuff you hear about it it just makes no sense to me. But look. In the past, there have been orders of quarantine regarding particular people and places. In my state of Illinois, the law that is governing the Department of Public Health allows for these type of orders. However, as a matter of due process, there are provisions that challenge such order in courts, and currently, there's a challenge in the courts to the travel order that the governor of our state had put together as a part of a blanket order, and is moving to the courts. While our state governor has cited that these laws are basis for the various orders, they don't apply to those blanket orders, and it's all what we call smoke and mirrors, pretending to have legal authorities that the U.S. Constitution just prohibits. With all that said, to include the current court challenge in our state to the governor's orders to stay at home, which was brought up by a Republican representative who's currently in the Senate in Springfield, Illinois, which is our capital, I can simply say that I'm not a medical professional, and I'm sure that the governor and the mayor are taking their lead on these requirements from the medical professionals. I'm hoping, which is why my family and I have supported and still continue to support the stay-at-home requirements to help flatten this curve, as we say, and the other requirements to include the wearing of the mask and gloves, and I wear those when I go out with my family, especially in public settings. But at the end of the day, it's a big but. We do this on a volunteer basis, and I keep on telling the politicians these things. We fully know that the blanket orders that are issued by the governors and the mayors across the country are unconstitutional on their face value. This is why I always tell the politicians, do not overreach your authority, but find a common way to work with Americans have already sacrificed.
As you know, if they overreach too much, they'll lose all of it.
But they do it all the time.
Right. If they overreach too much, then they'll have a rebellion. That's a whole different animal. That's not protest. That's a whole different animal. That brings, for instance, in Hong Kong, where I spent 6 months until they kicked me out in February. Those are not protests. That's an insurgency. There's a big difference. Yep. You've been in insurgency before. You well know. Yep. And once you reach that stage, it's way beyond. Hey, it's way beyond going. Hey, calm down, everybody. It's too late for that. They want your neck, and so that's very important for a lot of the U.S. leaders who have become comfortable over the years, not to forget that we are an armed society in the United States, and we are armed for this specific reason, for constitutional overreach, for taking our rights and whatnot, and millions of Americans are keenly cognizant of that, and we're rebellious people by nature. We've just been more, fat, dumb, and happy, let's say, for many generations because the economy's doing well. But if the economy starts to collapse, which it is, and the government starts to overreach, which it is, then you could go into the new ground, which is called rebellion. And that is hard to put the lid back on. Once that thing boils out of the pot, I've been to quite a few insurgencies around the world: Iraq, Afghanistan, Hong Kong, Nepal, Philippines, quite a few. And once it starts, it's way beyond anybody's control in the Capitol building.
Look, we're military guys, so we understand this thing. And we didn't take much, especially in combat. When the boss talked, hey, sir, God bless, but that's not your authority. In the first place, you got to turn around, make sure you're doing everything legal. You look, as I tell for politicians, when you overreach, you cause a constitutional crisis. And force, as you were saying, most of what is currently being done, especially in the case in Illinois, it goes to the courts, and the court challenges are going to probably work against you. So you got to find a fine line there, Mike. And a lot of these people don't do that. And this is not going to be the first challenge in the course. I'm going to tell you. That's where Americans are fighting it today. The various constitutional violations that we have include the First Amendment rights of speech, religion, and assembly, which are being violated. In some cases, as you said, around the country, they're forced the closure of gun shops. In Illinois, they've said is non-essential. Those are Second Amendment violations that we got to deal with. In some other cases, entry on private property, really seriously, by law enforcement. To force these blanket orders, like in an example that to enforce social distancing. These are absent of a warrant or even stopping someone on the street itself, or Fourth Amendment violations.
They're playing with fire, Sargis. They're playing.
Yeah.
We're never more than that far away from one little video or one little photo that goes viral that really grabs everybody, that people really go into rebellion, because as the tensions keep going up, and we've just seen a naked grab for wealth and wild printing of money that went to the top fraction of 1% of the people, just basically a naked grab, theft actually, and under the guise of keeping the economy going. Did you see how the stock market went up? When everything, you don't have to be an economist to realize that it should have been going down, and it's completely artificial. Not to go into that, but the bottom line is conditions are being created for rebellion. This is something that some of us have talked about since I became old enough to see it in the 80s and 90s. If the U.S. economy reaches some point where a significant number of Americans feel despair or hopelessness, and they feel that the government is overreaching, well, it's game on, and you can't calm it down after that point. The fire's on, and so that's a very serious concern in the United States at this point.
No, look, you can't do it. The problem is that's the nature of the politician. Is like the scorpion that. It keeps on, biting the frog. It's a nature. They have to work against their nature. Unfortunately, it's sometimes hard. A lot of these people think that they have these authorities, and it takes a lawsuit to say no. It takes court challenges, but there comes a point where what you're doing, you're degrading your own ability to work with the American people. I think the best place to go against what is currently happening. That's why I'm running for Congress. Go in and vote the incumbents out, period. Just vote them out. Straight slate, clean house. Because if you don't clean house, you're going to have these problems constantly. The American voter, the American person needs to either do it, like I said, through the legal process, try to do it possibly through the ballot box, and if it doesn't work, because that's why they call it the nature of incumbency. I get a running against a person who's got $2.3 million in their coffers, and what happens a lot of times, you're talking about how money gets dealt out. So I take money, I give it to, we'll use the Kennedy Center as an example, because Kennedy Center, a lot of people know about. Well, Kennedy Center gets the money, the employees are fired, or they're not working, they're not getting the money. A year from now, what happens, or even during this time of the election, you have people who are in the Kennedy Center or receive that money, turn on and give a donation to the various different parties that they're supporting. So money comes into the coffers of the people that are running in Congress. So I don't want to say that in some instances we would call that how you launder money to people that you want to help you stay in power. But that's the type of a feeling Americans get. They feel that they're being betrayed, that all you're doing is giving money to people who are going to turn on and give you through either a super PAC or a PAC or through a donation check money back to you because you're the one who stood on the House floor or in the Senate and said, I want money for this particular organization. And that's sad. And it gets to a point where you're starting to have the American people not trust their own government. It's not the way that we were put together. I mean, even now you were talking about they took private property, violation of the Fifth Amendment. The restrictions on the freedom of travel in itself. That you mentioned and we talked about everything that was covered by privileges and immunity clauses. These are not jokes. These are violating our constitutional rights on the various executive orders. It raises issues of the due process. If the law's not going to work for us, what are we doing? Where's the Fifth and the 14th Amendment? Most of the issues that we are dealing with today fall on the states. So we talk about federalism as being important for our nation. Well, those are the violations that we talked about, have seen and heard across this country. All those things are applied as a conduct of the states. And again, as you know yourself, the 14th Amendment, where it says that no state shall make or enforce any laws which are going to abridge the privileges or immunity of any citizens that are within the United States. Somebody has to read that stuff. And sometimes I don't understand if our politicians actually read the Constitution or even follow it, or with respect to what it says about private property or denying people their within their jurisdiction the equal protections of the law, as it's said in the 14th Amendment. So, these are myriads of constitutional violations are taking place, and they're unprecedented. They're dangerous, as you said, in a free society, in a republican democracy, and people will latch out. I mean, when law enforcement has a protection of the government and the courts, and then enters a synagogue in this case and forces the worshipers to disband, I mean, we should be worried about it. Or when you're assuming that in any case, in any scenario, you could be literally on your bike riding somewhere or in your car, and a police officer can just stop you, even though you haven't violated any traffic laws. That's dangerous. So what authorities are given to our law enforcement to enforce these things? And I love our law enforcement. Nothing. There's nothing in the Constitution. These are not legal, and we get to eventually unscrew this.
All right, Sargis, I'd love to have you back on again very soon. And with Al next time, we seem to have lost him somewhere. He dropped off into Netherlands. And can you mention the name of your website one more time, please?
Well, it is necse.net right now, because you're going to have to go to our archives, guys, because the nec-se.com, last time I was on your show, I guess some people don't like what I was saying about China, and we've had problems. So right now that site is parked. We're trying to unscrew it. There's been a lot of issues we're dealing with, and I think these internet issues are going to continue. I hope next time I'm here to talk, we could talk about just what we need to do internally in our nation to be able to counter China. Listen, we got to counter China, not for just our benefit. We got to counter China for the global benefit. Otherwise, Mike, you know yourself, when people say no, it's not possible, we're never going to go to war with somebody, you'll be surprised.
Thanks, Sargis. And I'm looking forward to having you back on soon. And I really want to talk more about Assyrian issues and domestic issues within the United States, which are obviously inching closer to things that some of us have been concerned about for many years. I do not want to see a civil war in the United States or even a low-level rebellion, because, as you know, you've been to war. These things, they get out of hand, and then they're completely unpredictable. We imagine how this thing will go, and it never goes like that, does it? It always goes in some, we think we know what's going to happen. It never does that. It goes in some way that's worse than we imagine, generally speaking. All right, brother. And looking forward to having you back on. Bye, Sargis.
Outstanding. Stay safe, man. Keep up the fight.
You too.
God bless.